Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of Internet Governance Briefings. As every month, we will look into what happened last month when it comes to digital developments and what's coming in the next month. Briefly, for those of you that might be new to the briefing, what is the outline of the briefing? We'll start with covering the three top trends of the previous month. Then we'll look into, with certainly some experts and guests joining, we'll look into what are the other developments of the month, and then we'll look into what's coming in June when it comes to various developments around the world, including some of the Diplo's work and the GIP work. And at the end, we'll go a quick round around the world, a virtual round, to see what's actually happening when it comes to digital policies around the world. I'll have a great pleasure to have a guest, a distinguished guest today. I'll come back to him, but our guest will be Mark Lyman. He's the Executive Director of the Universal Rights Group, and we'll talk about various aspects of human rights and social media, but you will see that very soon. For overall coverage of digital developments around the world in the previous months and before, you can always turn to Digital Watch Observatory and look into greater details. Let me now start first with what are the key three trends of the month. We'll speak about three topics. The first one is social media and, well, the ban of the account or removing of the account of Donald Trump, keeping him off the social networks. The second trend of the month that we at least distinguished was sort of a return of ransomware and what are some of the reactions to ransomware. And the third one will be about cryptocurrencies. We have seen different variations in the values of cryptocurrencies. So what is actually behind that? That's what we'll cover in the next hour. We'll start with the first trend, and I'm sure many of you have recorded this news that there was a decision by Facebook about Trump's account. There has much been happening in the previous months even. So we'll briefly reflect on what's there, and I'll invite my colleague Stephanie, who's joining us from Malta, to just provide a snapshot of what was in the news, what actually happened, and then we'll turn back to the guest. Stephanie.
Thanks, Vlad, and good to be here with you all. So what happened, right? I don't think it's new news for anyone. Regarding the 6th January violence that erupted in the USA, and the day after, Facebook found that Twitter violated its policy, or rather two of its policies, and blocked Trump's account for 24 hours, and later it actually suspended the account indefinitely. After that, it referred the decision to its oversight board, and the oversight board is an independent board that, as the name suggests, oversees the social media platforms' decisions. And in the beginning of May, the oversight board ruled that the company, that Facebook, was right in banning Trump from Facebook, but, and I'm quoting here, the board said that it was not permissible for the company to keep a user off the platform for an undefined period with no criteria for when or whether the account will be restored. So essentially, it insisted that the company applies a defined penalty instead, and in fact, it gave Facebook a period of time within which to revisit the decision. Apart from Facebook, there were also other social media platforms that banned Trump's accounts, for instance, Twitter, Instagram, if I'm not mistaken, and there was strong reaction from leaders worldwide regarding the decision of the social media platforms. So on one hand, we saw that the social media platforms, they reacted immediately, blocking the account. But on the other hand, there were these reactions by, for instance, the European leaders, among them the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel. They thought that the move was problematic, not as such because they, let's say, banned the account, but it's more because they think that a framework needs to be defined by law and not according to the decisions of a platform. And here we'll see what Mark Lyman has to say. Mark Lyman wrote about this extensively, and I think we would all very much benefit to hear from his thought on this. So back to you, Vlado.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'll just remind before I get back to you with one question. I'll remind all of you that please, you have the chat option, and that's one of the benefits of the webinars. So try to use the chat function as much as you can, and we have a special mechanism. We have our colleague Susonia, who is following closely on the chat. She's sort of a chat moderator, so she will pick on the interesting questions, comments, discussions, and feedback into our discussions. But let me turn back to Stephanie for the moment. We are waiting for our guest to also join us. Now, one interesting thing is that it's not just a user, right? It is the former president of the United States. To what extent this sort of a VIP role pumps the discussions? Many would probably object and say, if it was just me, maybe no one would really care. Should these sort of rules that the oversight board is trying to demand from Facebook be applicable to everyone? How does that work? What is that level of discussion?
Okay, thanks, Vlado, for the question. Yes, obviously, the fact that it was Trump and not the normal man in the street has attracted a lot of attention. And I think the leaders who have spoken out also have spoken out from the point of view of, a company has the ability to silence a leader, to silence someone as prominent as Trump. So what happens to others if they cross the line? But there's also the argument that the social media platform, as popular, as widespread as Facebook, should the company be in this main position of deciding who is on social media or who is not, or is it a case of having more robust legal frameworks for the companies to decide on a content policy? So we see here that literally Facebook and all the other social media platforms are the de facto gatekeepers of content. There's also the argument that Facebook is a private company. So essentially there are, although albeit a small group of people who think that since this is a private company, Facebook has the right to decide regardless of what the public opinion is. And then there's also the issue of the oversight board. So the oversight board is Facebook's external, let's say, court to decide, to review the decisions on Facebook. So Facebook, I would say quite wisely, assigned this role to an external group, and has mandated this external group to review the decisions. So it's not Facebook, it's not the company itself, but it's this oversight board, which has taken this decision on, in this case, Trump. It is also taking other decisions. We've also seen quite a few decisions that the oversight board has taken, but obviously this was the high-profile case that we're all following. And obviously, underlying all of these aspects is the issue of freedom of speech and of human rights. And I think this is where Mark Lyman's opinion would be, we would be very glad to have his thought on this. So Vlada, back to you. I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you, Steph. We are waiting for Mark. I hope he'll join us soon. I have one question before I turn also to Sonia to see whether there is anything interesting in the chat already. Maybe as a reminder, how was this oversight board set up? Is that something that came from outside of Facebook or actually from inside? What is the sort of the, I wouldn't say the structure, but the way that the role that this oversight board plays?
Oh, sorry. It's quite independent. So I think Facebook was feeling a lot of the pressure in the past years about the moderation decisions that it was taken. So it mandated the setup of this oversight board. If I'm not mistaken, and here, if there are people more closer to the board may correct me, but I think it's the oversight board which sets its own mandate. And in fact, a few weeks ago, we saw that it extended its own mandate to cover also those requests for oversight, for review, coming from the users themselves. So the oversight board is not only now looking at the requests coming from Facebook, but also of the users. But I think the main point is that it's quite independent. So in a way, there's a distance. There's I would say, a healthy distance between the company itself and the policies and the oversight board reviewing the content moderation and also reviewing Facebook's own policy regarding the content.
Thank you, Steph. It's quite, I think, an interesting model that we have been seeing to some extent also in other areas. I remember when Zoom started, there was a lot of discussion about security, and then the Zoom actually they did choose sort of an oversight body for security chosen of particular individuals. This is a little bit different case, but it's interesting to see this other model where maybe companies are trying to self-regulate in a way and in a battle with the judicial institutions. We'll get back to you. Let me just check quickly with Sonia if we have anything interesting in the chat. Again, I encourage all of you to share your thoughts, your questions, and raise your concerns, and then Sonia will try to pick the main bits from the discussion. Let me just check with Sonia if we have anything, or we can move on. Sonia.
We don't have questions yet, Vlada, thank you. But for now, we have some comments, and like from Nigel Hickson, like Facebook should be setting rules under a framework, and having an oversight board is at least the first step. So, and also Paulina said that it's interesting to follow the fate of the Florida law here, from freedom of speech implications to the questions of enforcement and jurisdiction. So the general theme seems to be, and as we were speaking, Wolfgang also commented that that it doesn't seem too possible that one oversight board can handle such an amount of cases, which I agree. And other than that, I'm going to be posting links throughout the briefing in the chat, so please keep an eye on. And Jolly McPhee has posted a link for the real-time text for more accessibility, or if anyone wants to follow the briefing by text. So I'd recommend everyone to keep an eye on the chat and please comment and ask questions. Thank you, Vlada.
Vlada, hello?
Yep.
Vlada, I may complain to Diplo's oversight body if you don't give me a floor.
Yeah, I don't know whether the hand was raised, but I think we can accommodate it. Yes, Jovan, please join us and welcome.
Thank you. Just one few comments. I think there was quite in-depth coverage. There was an interesting question from Wolfgang on probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of cases. And I guess that the board is established in the sort of spirit of precedence law, US and UK school of thought, less than a concrete juridical body like a court itself that people can address their cases. Therefore, most likely it will set the principles through the precedents. And one of the great principles will be set by dealing with this Trump case, which I would like to reflect on since it is a deeper and more profound than just the Facebook decision. Since I'm connecting from Geneva, there is all good Voltaire says that go like something like this: I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. It was said, well, a few centuries ago, and it has to be revisited because it is a cornerstone of the enlightenment of freedom of expression and ultimately democracy. Therefore, we have some deeper issues here to reflect and to revisit, essentially to revisit if digital technology with its amplifier effect will require us to revisit this saying of Voltaire or founding fathers in the United States. It is happening all over the place and space. We have a social control mechanisms that exist in China since Confucius' time, immemorial times, but they are getting new power now with digital technology. Therefore, that's probably a very interesting aspect if these core principles of humanity in different areas, different regions, different traditions need to be now revisited. And that's underlying issue. And the second point, which is also zoom out perspective, is that we are discussing Facebook on two levels. Sometimes we speak about legal sort of arrangements. And Facebook, yes, it's a private company. It is still protected by the Section 230 of the Communication Act. But in the same time, it has de facto power beyond the simple private company. There is the lack of sync in that respect. And that will be another issue that we'll have to revisit, either to adjust the law or to do some other measures that will synchronize these two different aspects of limited legal responsibility, very well shielded, and sort of broader impact of society. And oversight board and all of these activities on Facebook and other companies are basically their attempt to be proactive and to do something without being forced to do something. Therefore, they're realizing that there is a problem. And then they're making these moves. Those are just two reflections. Over to you, Vlada.
Thank you, Jovan. It's interesting, or maybe a provocation that, yes, but in Voltaire's time, the effect of going out to the park and saying whatever you want was not the same. And it is an excellent prelude to the questions to our dear guests. So with us, we have Mark Lyman, who is the Executive Director of the United Rights Group, which is a think tank based in Geneva, New York. In Bogota, they have a full focus on human rights. And that is the right moment to actually involve Mark. Mark, welcome to this show, so to speak, and thank you for joining. I hope you managed to hear a little bit of this previous discussion, and I'll just leave it to you. From the human rights perspective, how would you comment on this whole case with Trump, Facebook, and all of that? Mark.
Okay, thank you. And sorry I was a little late. In this brave digital new world, I had a problem getting a link to get in. Anyway, it's good to be here. Good to see Jovan and everybody again. You know, there are three kind of broad issues when it comes to the whole discussion around Facebook and freedom of expression and Mr. Trump. The first is the broader question of freedom of expression. And as I wrote recently, the Facebook and also Twitter's move against President Trump, and then the decision of the oversight board to essentially support Facebook's decision to suspend him, though of course they said as well that it shouldn't have been an indefinite suspension, but broadly they backed up Facebook's decision to suspend him. And this is interesting because for a long time I've been a bit of a lone wolf out here in Geneva, arguing for a more interventionist position on freedom of expression. What do I mean by that? Well, for a long time, the United Nations, especially its mechanisms like the Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression, also big freedom of expression NGOs like Article 19, have, and most resolutions actually adopted at the Human Rights Council, have followed a broadly US approach to freedom of speech, which means, according to which and I exaggerate here, but maybe hopefully it will create some debate. The US position, in my view, has for a long time been almost anything goes. People can say whatever they like, and there's an enormously high threshold that needs to be reached in order for any action to be taken to prohibit free speech or otherwise control free speech. Under US constitutional law, that threshold is nobody can incite immediate violence. So I can't, stand on a pedestal and call on my followers to go and kill Muslims or kill Jews, for example. But anything below that is fair game. Anything below that is okay. Why did the US say that? Because, and Jovan mentioned this, in US history, and according to Molière or Voltaire, whoever it was, this idea that there'll be a societal impulse, that the best antidote to hate speech or fake news today is more speech. So the society, if you like, will step in and will drown out this hate speech. Now, that position is held for a long time. But I think what's key at the moment is in the digital age, those old American certainties no longer hold. Because in the digital age, if one person says something in Mississippi, it won't only affect the community in Mississippi, it has the potential to spread around the world. And before anybody any kind of societal check can kick in, the damage is already done. And we saw that, for example, with the Christchurch attacks against the mosques, and we've seen it countless other times since. The attacks against churches in Sri Lanka is another good example. So one thing I think Facebook's decision and the support for that decision from the Facebook oversight board shows us is that those old American certainties are changing. Now there's a much greater willingness to understand that actually interventionism, as long as it's done in a proportional way, is acceptable, and actually is more than acceptable. It's a good thing. What do I mean by proportionality? Well, it means that yes, we still start from the basic point that freedom of expression should be protected and people should be able to say what they like, but we're much more willing to intervene to prevent that freedom of speech being used, for example, to undermine the fundamental tenets of democracy, as Trump did with his, stop the steal and essentially inciting attack on Congress. We're much more willing now, and Facebook is as well, to step in if it's in order to protect public health, for example, in the context of disinformation about COVID vaccines or injecting yourself with bleach or any of those kind of things. I would argue all of this is incredibly sensible, but it is a massive change. And I think people don't realize in an American context, and therefore in a UN context, because if America sneezes at the UN, we tend to catch a cold, everything has changed. The other point, which I will try and make more briefly, is the Facebook Oversight Board itself. I heard a little bit about that in the introduction. Jovan suggested that Facebook had done it so they weren't, if I understood correctly, Jovan, so they weren't forced to do something later. I actually think that perhaps takes things too far. I think Facebook actually should be commended for taking the step of establishing the oversight board. And I think they did it less because they were forced to, but more because they had to. Their old position of we're a platform, so we're not responsible for things that are posted here, was increasingly untenable, whether it was hate speech, incitement to violence, the use of Facebook as a platform, for example, in the context of the genocide against the Rohingya in Myanmar. this position was no longer tenable. And in a more positive sense, Facebook realized, I think, that if we're going to control Facebook, if we're going to control hate speech, fake news, then government, states, the United Nations can't possibly do it without the active involvement and engagement of Facebook and Twitter and others. You know, every day, or at least every week, probably every day actually, billions of posts being produced on Facebook and other social media. It's clearly impossible for any public oversight body, whether it's at national level or international level like the United Nations, to be able to monitor all of those posts, to remove posts which are dangerous, and to generally, you know, control some kind of, maintain some kind of factual narrative that doesn't incite hatred or violence against particular groups. The only people who can do that are the social media platforms themselves. And that's why they've employed armies of spotters. They've also heavily, of course, employed algorithms to be able to spot these things. And so Facebook, you know, put its money where its mouth is. They said, we need to be involved in order to control hate speech, control fake news, while doing so in a manner which protects legitimate free speech. And so we're going to take a step forward. They also, of course, realized that they might not always get it right. And so they employed, or not employed because it's an independent board, but they established the Independent Oversight Board. And I think it was a far-sighted move. It's, you know, full of, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's full of good people who are human rights experts. And I think they've broadly taken the correct decision when it comes to Donald Trump. And that's where I'll end. Do I agree or not with the decision to suspend Donald Trump and then to maintain the suspension? Unlike many people in the human rights world, I actually do. I agree, by the way, with Jack Dorsey and others that it's an incredibly significant decision and potentially quite worrisome. But I think on balance, it was the right thing to do. And again, I go back when I say this to the growing power of the internet and the onset of digital democracy. The old certainties about democracy and free speech are no longer certainties in the digital world. And the damage that somebody like Donald Trump can do, as we all saw, just by drip feeding either hate speech, for example, the China virus, which has partly contributed, in my view, to the rise in hateful acts and violence against the American Asian community in the United States, or more famously, of course, the Stop the Steal, creating seeds of distrust in the American political process, creating distrust in the outcome of the election. That has real and devastating consequences, not only for US democracy, but also for the rights of people, for example, to choose your own government, or the right to life on the part of the Capitol police officers who died. And so we need to send out a message now, I think, in the digital world, that politicians can't just say what they like and then claim, you know, it was only a tweet, or I didn't mean it, or delete the tweet a few days later, or apologize, because words have consequences. And Donald Trump's words had a multitude of consequences. And it was dangerous during the election to leave him in that position. And it's still dangerous now. I mean, you see, he still has control of the Republican Party. Lastly, it also sends an important message to other politicians that they cannot go around either promoting hate speech, going after minorities, or spreading lies and disinformation. They won't get away with it. They will be suspended as well. So there's also an important prevention aspect to this. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, so many interesting provocations there and open questions that you raised. But I'll turn. I would have millions of questions. We don't have that much time. But I'll turn to Sonia again to see what are the comments from the chat, because I'm sure there will be quite some interesting comments. Sonia, brief look at the chat.
Yes, there is definitely interesting comments from Richard and Steph. And the main thing is distinguishing the right to free speech and the right to be published, and how there are already many laws and restrictions in place with traditional media and printed media. And perhaps some of them could be applied to social media platforms. But in any case, leaving it all up to private companies to decide who will be and who won't be censored, well, in the comments, according to the comments, and I agree, is definitely not something that's desired. So that's how I'd wrap it up.
Thanks, Sonia. Perfect. I'll just maybe have a quick, I don't know, Jovan, if you wanted to comment now, or yeah, please.
No, just one question. And Mark and I had intense debates on this issue. What we have to keep in mind that we are now, as Mark said, questioning one of the pillars of the human rights and the international order to the large extent. It cannot be binary yes or no. You are arguing basically it should be analog. We have the principle, but then we will find exceptions. One of the issues which will have a far-reaching consequences is that in US, to the large extent, European society, you can manage this balance carefully through juridical bodies, through political system, through the free press. But in many other societies, it will be more binary, yes or no. Freedom of speech or no freedom of speech. Therefore, that decision, which was, we can discuss, I disagree on quite a few points on special lifetime banning by private company, but in the United States, one can contain it within the political legal system. But it has a global impact. As you indicated, it has, this issue is, in that sense, will be less analog. To fine tune, it will be more binary. And this is my concern.
And I think it's a very important angle that you also outlined, is stepping out of the shoes of just being in US and the Western world, because there is the ways that the other governments would also treat these situations. But a quick question, certainly, Mark, if you want brief reactions to these comments, tweet-like. And maybe a final question from me is, based on this case and what the Oversight Board did, can you be, or do you feel as an optimist that we are coming to a solution or a way towards a solution which might work to make it all more towards human rights? Mark.
Okay, thank you. How long do I have, by the way, to?
Well, I would do it 2 or 3 minutes maximum, if you can.
Okay,
tweets.
Sure. Okay, tweets. Okay, hashtag. Okay. I'll go to the questions from the floor first of all. Which were basically, people saying it's not okay to leave it to social media companies. Very good questions. I actually agree with that. I wasn't advocating for leaving it completely to social media companies. My point was that the only solutions to this have to come from public-private partnership. It has to be governments and social media companies working together. For realistic reasons, as I mentioned, billions of posts, governments can't possibly police all of those. But on the other hand, you're right, you can't leave it completely to the social media companies for obvious reasons. So governments really need to set, in my view, the guardrails, the broad rules of the game. And then social media companies need to operate within those broad frameworks. And by the way, social media companies themselves have said they want that kind of legal clarity. The problem is, up until now, the two have not been talking. Jovan's excellent point about the potential global consequences, that we may be able to have these nuanced discussions in America or in Europe, but what kind of lessons are less democratic people around the world going to take from this? And I would say that works both ways, actually, Jovan. On the one hand, you're right, many dictators around the world would probably quite like the idea that they can somehow control or limit free speech, depending on, and I'm not saying the Prime Minister of India as a dictator, but clearly he has decided that he wants to control the discourse around COVID-19 and the government's response on social media. And he started threatening the social media platforms to take down what he considers to be fake news, but actually seems completely fact-based, and it's just critical of the government. But on the other hand, there's also an offensive interest in terms of taking a more proactive response to issues around hate speech and fake news online. And that is something Hillary Clinton has talked a lot about. And it's that countries like China, who are trying to export, let's say, a more controlled version of democracy, are doing so on the grounds, in their view, that liberal democracy is a mess, that it's complete chaos. And therefore, people should adopt the Chinese model, or other countries should adopt the Chinese model. And therefore, it's important to counteract the actions of people like Donald Trump, who are making it chaotic and who are giving democracy a bad name, by taking a more forceful approach to fake news and hate speech. Lastly, am I an optimist? I've often been called a kind of cynical optimist. I'm usually very critical of what's going on. I don't like the status quo often. But on this, I am fairly optimistic, I must say. I think this move, as I said, towards a more public-private partnership approach to addressing issues around hate speech, fake news, and freedom of expression is the way to go. We still have a long way to go, but I think the kind of model demonstrated by Facebook's oversight board, if it's adopted industry-wide and if they work with governments and the United Nations, then I think it's the right way to go.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for ending on a more optimistic note. I think sometimes we need in this field of digital policies a bit more optimism. Thanks a lot for your time. We'll definitely continue. I suggest also to Jovan and to you maybe to organize a separate session on this issue. We have to move on with the other developments. Thank you, Mark. Please stay with us if you can. And in the meantime, we are moving on to the second trend of the month, which is unfortunately again related to cybersecurity and particularly to ransomware. And I invite my colleague Andriana, this time in Vivo in the office. Andriana, welcome, who is covering cybersecurity, cybercrime issues for the Digital Watch. Andriana, what has happened actually? Why is ransomware again in the forefront of the news?
Well, I have 3 minutes to describe 3 cyber attacks, so I'm not sure how this is going to go. I'll have to be not so detailed, unfortunately, but I guess there's always time for questions and for the chat. What happened in the beginning of this month was the hack of Colonial Pipeline, and that really had some media coverage. Colonial Pipeline came under a ransomware attack by the DarkSide group, and in a very interesting turn of events, they were really open about the fact that they paid the ransom. It was 75 Bitcoin, $4.4 million US, which I should think is not that much for the Colonial Pipeline, considering that they cover 45% of the US East Coast. And their CEO was very, very open about it, saying that this was the right thing to do for the country. And on the other side of the pond, we got news that Ireland is under, their health sector is under a ransomware attack by the Conti group, again, a Russian-speaking group. And on the other side of the universe, Conti is also attacking the New Zealand health sector. What's happening in Ireland is that some operations are now doing well. For example, COVID-19 vaccination is now on schedule, but in New Zealand it's only starting. So we haven't seen much response from either of these two healthcare situations. Ireland did say that they will not pay the ransom, which is in their case 20 million, which is 4 times bigger than for the Colonial Oil. That's very interesting. And for New Zealand, they've been very tight-lipped. We don't know much. We do know that staff and patient data has been stolen. They received an email from the hackers just this morning. They are confident that they can restore all their systems without paying, and police is investigating. That's all. And in Ireland, while hackers have been threatening to release the data and to sell it, we haven't seen much yet, even though the deadline was actually yesterday. And then in a very surprising turn of events, they gave the decryption tool for free to the hospital. And the hospital is testing it. It's going well so far, but the hackers are still threatening to release the data if not paid 20 million.
So there are some good hackers at the end.
Yes.
Well, the question is, ransomware is not new. I mean, we've seen WannaCry and NotPetya and many other cases in the past. Why is this so specific now, that because it's stroke pipeline and the other things? Why is it so now hot?
Perhaps because we have had 3 attacks that are so close one to each other. Perhaps because Colonial really caused some damage. There have been different reactions. Some countries are already asking themselves, are we able to withstand an attack like that? And as far as attacks on health sector go, you would think that hackers would not do that right now that we're in a pandemic, but they don't care about that. They do care about the money. And when you look at Conti's attacks, they actually have conducted over 400 attacks on critical infrastructure, that is health infrastructure. They're even attacking in the US right now. As far as FBI says, there are 16 attacks that the US is defending right now.
Now, when you mention US, actually what's interesting is that this event and maybe the SolarWinds and the Microsoft Exchange hack possibly moved the US administration to come up to some steps. And one of the breaking discussions over there is whether companies should be paying the ransom and how to track that. And so the US has come up with some suggestions how to combat that. What's new on that front?
It has. Well, there have been several developments, perhaps because the attack is actually over and they can now put their attention to it. As far as Ireland and New Zealand go, the only thing Ireland has done is file an injunction, and it has no names in it. But the US has been able to take some steps. First, we had chronologically speaking, we had the executive order from President Biden. And the executive order says that federal security standards must be bolstered. Software supply chain has to be strengthened as well. And a very interesting proposal that caught everyone's attention, even though it's somewhere in the middle of the document, is the cybersecurity review board of sorts that will be convening after a major cyber attack to review it. And the concern that has been brought about that is, well, are these people ever going to go home? Because are they just going to sit there? There have been so many cyber attacks, and how are they going to differentiate about which one are they going to convene or not? Another thing that the executive order says is that, well, there needs to be a strengthened capacity for detection of attacks and for remediation and for investigation. But that's not all that the US did in the last, let's say, 15 days. There has also been introduced to the House again a bill that was actually introduced in 2020, and it's a pipeline security. It's Pipeline Security Act, and what it would do is codify the role of TSA in protecting pipelines, which they already do. Interesting data, they had their pipeline security section had 6 employees, and now it has 34. And not all of them are, cybersecurity experts. They will get more personnel, and they will get the rights to, let's say, set some guidelines and do risk analysis and actually investigate pipelines, but let's hope they get more than another 36 people. And another thing that has happened, and this is very interesting considering the debate you just mentioned, is that there has been a family tax compliance agenda that says that all company transactions over $10,000 US need to be reported to the IRS,
including the ransom pay.
Exactly. And it's a very big question whether companies are going to do that. Are they going to be open like the Colonial Oil, or are they going to hide that they paid? we'll see how that goes, but definitely some steps in creating a ransomware policy of sorts.
No, that's interesting, and then particularly what you mentioned, the software supply chain, which is now opening the Pandora box of how to secure the software. Putting my hat of the Geneva Dialogue on Responsible Behavior project, there's a lot of discussion on how to secure the software supply chain and how to increase this accountability of the software producers and so on. We'll follow that, definitely. Thank you, Andrana, for joining us. You'll get back to this stage afterwards to lead us around the world.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll see you later.
In the meantime, we'll cover the third trend, and then we'll come back to Sonia with some questions. So let's move to the third trend, which is related to cryptocurrencies. Those of you that are addicted to checking how the value of Bitcoin and the others every once in a while probably saw quite a drop of the value. So I invite my colleague Arvin, who is following cryptocurrencies and all of this spectrum, to explain us briefly. Arvin, what happened?
Hi, Vlada, and hi to all. Again, we witnessed a bit of a power of social networks, to be honest, because it all started seemingly from one tweet from just Elon Musk. When he's tweeting, it's not just like the same like anyone else. So he actually, in a one tweet, ditched the previous decision from the Tesla company to accept Bitcoins. He said that Tesla will stop accepting Bitcoin because of environmental concerns, which was a bit weird, because we thought that Musk would know how Bitcoin is actually mined or secured. But that being said, that was an avalanche for a massive sale on exchanges. And another interesting news was published that particular day by the Reuters, saying that China actually banned cryptocurrencies to its payment processes, like WeChat, Alibaba, and others. Practically, that's not the new news. It's news from 2020 that happened in the March 2020. But now they kind of reminded the companies about that, and that was like spread like a wildfire, again triggering another China is buying Bitcoin headlines and a bit of a panic sell in crypto world. On top of that, we even had a tweet from Pope, his official account on Twitter. The Pope also asked for the technology companies to actually stop or slow down development of technologies we spend too much energy. It's kind of related to the Bitcoin mining and the vast energy that is now consuming. Right now we are at the 70 terawatts per hour, which is the size of Switzerland. Of course, all that energy, Bitcoin does not emit that much CO as Switzerland, but again, it's something that needs to be kind of addressed. At the same couple of days later, we got the information, even from the Chinese, some of the Chinese contacts, that actually China is sending the police and forces to forcefully shut down the mining operations, which are using coal, which are using energy from the coal, meaning that the part of the China's mining companies which are powered by hydropower, they're still intact, they're all working. But there an actual crackdown in China towards the companies which are mining Bitcoin using the electricity from coal, burning coal. So I guess this is more of a kind of in line with the CO2 targets the China had on 2020. All of that had put us in a spiral downward to the currencies.
No, and what's quite interesting there is that one would probably expect that this is maybe because of the digital national cryptocurrencies and all of that, but not because of energy. And we always envisage that, mining of Bitcoins is not the same as the real mining, but it boils down to the energy actually. But I do want to ask you, to what extent you think that also these attempts of China and then the US and the others to come up with their national cryptocurrencies impacted this whole change as well?
Indeed, they are. I mean, especially in a kind of news we received from states, which Andriana just mentioned earlier. It's a reform of IRS. The Biden's administration is actually suggesting that all of the transactions which are above 10,000, even in the crypto, 10,000 US, even in the crypto, they will get taxed and they will need to be reported by anyone. This is a kind of a, might look like a crackdown for cryptocurrencies, because there is an actual framework which is prepared by the Biden administration to actually launch e-dollar or a similar electronic currency which will be redundant to Chinese. Why? China is already set, everything is tested. Their central bank digital currency is working perfectly. So it's now just a time of release. Will they do it, or will they push against the SWIFT, which is now the global payment networks? So in some kind of a, I don't know, scenario, geopolitical scenario, China might push that, and states then are forced to go quickly into electronic dollar, and they don't want that. They will start preparing it right away, and Biden plan has a kind of a plan. Biden administration has a plan for that in that sense. So it is a race.
Quite an interesting overview. Thanks, Arvin. We won't spend much more time on this, but we'll definitely have to get back to this in the next briefings. It's an interesting field. I'll come back briefly to Sonia to see whether there were any reactions overall in the chat on these topics. Sonia.
Well, I'll go backwards and start with the reactions and questions to the cryptocurrencies, where Ying-Chu Chen has mentioned that cryptocurrencies are seen as decentralized, but they can change and be disrupted with a single tweet. And Richard came in and asked, Richard Hill, why do we need with a more basic question saying, why do we need cryptocurrencies when digital transactions work fine with normal currencies? And the answer is anonymity. And he's asking, who needs anonymity aside from criminals and tax evaders? But going back to cyber attacks, our second trend, a main question, I'll shorten it because it was a long string of comments, but I'll shorten. The main question was, when is the world going to wake up and realize that we can't continue to set in a setup where significant and critical public infrastructure can be brought down by a small group of individuals? And similar market failures exist for pharmaceuticals, airplanes, cars. So we know how to address them, safety standards, but why aren't we implementing it would be the main question. And going back to the cryptocurrencies, why cryptocurrencies? That's how I'd end the discussion.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Well, I leave it to all of you to continue the discussion in the chat. And definitely one of the key questions is, why are we so weak with implementation of everything we agree on? Let's move on. I want to ask you again with a poll, a question to all of you. Which out of these three trends you think was the most important trend or development of the month? So again, this discussion about social media and Trump, the ransomware and the response by the US and generally response to ransomware, or the cryptocurrency change in the values and all of that that's happening. So we'll open up the Mentimeter, and then you can again open your own other browser, go to Mentimeter or menti.com, type the code 7705518. You can see it above me, and then vote for what you think is the dominant trend of the month out of these three. And certainly, if there is any other trend that you think we didn't cover here, please add it to the chat, and then we can always get back and see what we might have missed. While you vote, I'll briefly come back to Jovan. Since we're running out of time, Jovan, I want to briefly come back to you with a zoom out perspective, again, a tweet or two on what we discussed today, and then we'll run to what's next. Jovan.
Thank you, Vlada. In brief, broader issues than they look right now. We already tackled some of them with the Mark Lemon, really substantive revisiting of the question of freedom of expression as one of the pillars of democracy. We are revisiting sort of 2 or 3 centuries of Enlightenment developments, and this is very serious discussion. Second point, what Richard mentioned in his comment, why do we need anonymity? I think that for a long time we were on autopilot and we were just taking things for granted, but it is a good time to ask these questions. Why do we need anonymity? Like, why do we need uncontrolled freedom of speech without any limitations? Is it good for society? And ultimately, this is the real question. How to contribute to well-being of society around 3 UN pillars, which are always useful to remember: peace and security, human development and realization of human economic potentials, and protection of human rights and human dignity. Those are broad, but still a good guardrails for us to understand and to see then if, for example, anonymity in the cyber currency should contribute to that or not, or what type of freedom of expression. Therefore, we are in a way revisiting, we call it often digital social contract, but ultimately core issues of society and the way how technology impacts them, how it reshapes some of the pillars of modern society. And we shouldn't forget, in Western society, but also in other societies with different cultural, political, and religious traditions, which shouldn't be lost from the understanding and the scope of our following. Time to step back, look out of the box, and get to the basics around these 3 pillars: peace and security, economic and social development, respect for human dignity and human rights.
Thank you, Johan. Useful zoom out, definitely. Let's get back to the results of your votes. And even if you didn't have much time, you can continue voting. But let's see where we are at the Mentimeter. Which one of your trends stands out? What you believe is the key out of the trends? And again, you can always put your thoughts about the other trends of the month and other developments we should look more into in the chat. Let me see if we have the results. Okay, so currently we have the first trend, if I'm not wrong, the social media one, which is more or less expected. We did give most time to that, but it is also a very intriguing development, which will, as we heard, shape other areas as well. Let us move now quickly through a couple of other developments of this month, what we call the IgBarometer, which is basically trying to sense the pressure of different areas in the internet governance field, where this pressure is high, where this pressure is rather low. So basically, out of many of these areas, the pressure of the developments were not so high. There was a particular high pressure in the security area. This is something that you've already heard a little bit from. The other high pressure was related to e-commerce and the internet economy. The third one, where we can say there was some sort of a higher pressure, is about digital rights. And the last one is about the internet infrastructure, which we'll touch briefly. When it comes to security, we covered the ransomware, but there are 2 interesting processes within the UN. One is ending. This is the group of governmental experts on cyber norms, which is ending in the last days of May. We're still waiting to see whether there will be an agreement similar maybe to what the open-ended working group had. Different trend, or different track, is setting up a start of an ad hoc group within the United Nations working on a possible draft of the Cybercrime Convention. They had the first meeting. They've selected the chair, Algeria, a number of, I think it's even a dozen of vice chairs. So we'll be looking at a number of meetings on drafting the possible convention of cybercrime throughout 2021. When it comes to e-commerce and digital or internet economy, the EU is planning a new tax rules, which will more or less build up on the rules of the plans of the OECD. In terms of digital rights, we are seeing some sort of a light pushback on the implementation of the WhatsApp new privacy policy. Some pushbacks are coming from Brazil, Argentina, India, but also Germany. And lastly, the infrastructure. There's quite a discussion about semiconductors and semiconductor shortages, but I leave it for a few minutes after this, when we'll hear actually from our colleague in Asia what is happening and how are the investments in this industry building up from China to South Korea to Europe to US and other parts of the world. Moving on to look at what are the events coming next month. And I again invite my colleague Andriana to take over the floor and lead us through the events and afterwards through the tour around the globe. Andriana.
Thank you, Vlado. Let's be very quick about this since we are definitely running out of time. First of all, in the beginning of June, we have the organizational session of the open-ended working group on cybersecurity. We'll see how that goes. Currently, we don't know much, but definitely during our next briefing, we'll be able to tell you how the group has organized themselves. This will be the second open-ended working group on the topic. And then we have RightsCon, which is having its 10th anniversary, and it will have a program of 500 plus sessions on content control, internet access, democracy and elections, civil society, resistance, AI. There will be something for everyone there, I'm pretty sure, and I do not envy them for organizing such a big event. Kudos to them. And then the NATO summit will be held on 14th June. What they have said is that they will discuss issues that have been predicted by the NATO 2030 agenda, and among them are cyber attacks, as well as emerging and disruptive technologies, something that I'm sure we'll cover during our next briefing as well. Beginning on the same day as ICANN 71, only this one lasts 3 days, it will be a policy forum, a virtual one, and ICANN will discuss the NSSEC, cybersecurity in general, privacy, their WHOIS system, and so on. And at the end of the month, we have EuroDig 2021, a regional internet governance initiative. The day zero will be dedicated to pre-sessions, and the following 2 days we'll have 18 workshops. And there's another novelty, which is 4 focus sessions. And this will be held on green IG and sustainability, digital interdependence, cybersecurity, and European mediascape. These sessions will be slightly longer. They will also incorporate breakout sessions and drafting of messages at the very end. And now we are still not done with events, but we're moving to Geneva, where my colleague Marco Lotti is, and he will tell us about the events Diplo and the GIP will be organizing in June. Marco, over to you.
Thank you, Andriana. Let me tell you what to expect from the GIP and Diplo for the upcoming month when it comes to events, resources, and also courses. So starting with events, tomorrow we have our digital and environment tour. This event is part of the 12 Tours to Navigate Digital Geneva. It's a project that we will be carrying out throughout the year. We want to navigate the rich and dense digital policy scene in Geneva each month through a specific lens, that of a specific internet governance issue. Last month was the digital economy, and tomorrow will be the environment tour. So you're most welcome to join us. And next month will be, as you can see from the slide, the data tour. After that, we have our series of masterclasses on Byzantine diplomacy, the elixir of longevity. And at the beginning of each month, we have our usual web debate. At the end of the next month, we will also have the upcoming masterclass, Renaissance Diplomacy, as well as our usual monthly appointments, which are the IG briefing and the June data tour. So this is just a nutshell what to expect from us when it comes to events. As I said before, when it comes to the updates that you can expect from us, we also have courses and we also have resources. When it comes to the courses, June 2021 will be a dense month when it comes to the launch of some of our courses. And I'm mentioning them here because for some of them you can still apply. As you can see from the slide, you still have a month to apply to Internet Technology and Digital Policy, Multilateral Diplomacy, the Advanced Diploma in Internet Governance, Bilateral Diplomacy, and our traditional course on Diplomatic Law, Privileges and Immunities. So you can just visit diplomacy.edu/courses. Sonia, I think you have typed the link in the chat for those of you that are interested to apply. And then when it comes to the last update from our side, we have our usual resources. We have a weekly appointment and a monthly appointment. On the one hand, every Friday, as we have started recently, we have our GIP Digital Watch weekly newsletter For those of you that really want to stay on top of digital developments and internet governance, as soon as developments happen, you can have a sum up view of whatever has happened each week, every Friday. And then on June the 1st, our usual appointment is the monthly newsletter, where we condense whatever has happened in the previous month when it comes to internet governance. And you can also find the link where to subscribe. That is all from Geneva, and that is all from the GAP and Diplo side for the month of June. Andriana, back to you.
Thank you, Marco, for that comprehensive overview. And, well, quite some activities that we have there. It will be tricky to do all that, but we are now moving to the regional updates. And this month we have a bit of a treat. We will have one of our regular guests live with us. Amrita Chowdhury, the director of Cyber Cafe Association in India, will be talking with me about the chips shortage. There's a global shortage, but Amrita and I will discuss how this particularly affects Asia.
Thank you, Andriana. Hope I'm audible, and thank you for having me here. I'm sure everyone out here knows that there is a global shortage of chips happening, especially it started with automakers and then it moved to consumer electronics and even into gaming equipments. And this shortage is predicted to last this whole year and even run into 2022. While there is a lot of development happening, especially in the US and even Europe, but I'll restrict to Asia Pacific because most of the semiconductor production is currently concentrated in Taiwan, South Korea, and China. And most of the companies are there, working there, are bolstering their production capacity. In fact, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, also known as TSMC, which is the largest contract chip maker, is stating that it expects to be able to catch up with the minimum requirement of customer demand for auto chips by end of June. South Korea has announced a bigger tax break, plus around $883 million in loan for its local chip industry to encourage them. And post the trade sanctions by US on China, China's Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, or SMIC, which is part funded by the state, is playing a crucial role to boost its domestic semiconductor manufacturing capabilities. And the company plans to invest about $2.35 billion with the government of Shenzhen to build a new fabrication plant capable of producing more than 40,000 wafers per month. So if we look at the situation, Andriana, one can expect more development related to nations aiming to become self-reliant in the chip industry in the days to come, especially looking at the geopolitics which is on currently.
Well, you are definitely right about that, Amrita, considering the fact that last week we saw that the US will propose $52 million to invest in the industry. We've also seen the EU's pledge to invest 20 to 30 million to raise production to 20%, considering that Europe currently produces a bit less than 10%. Interestingly, we have different data for South Korea. I've seen 452 billion being pledged to be invested by 2030. Maybe yours is a shorter term investment. But considering the situation in Taiwan, the floods and the power outages and the COVID-19, I'm not so sure they'll be able to reach their goal of having minimal production by June, but fingers crossed, you know. But considering the fact that Asia has been producing the largest amount of chips, will we see any other Asian country go into the market, Amrita?
So there are aspirations. If you look, for example, home in India, the Indian government is planning to come up with big spends to encourage industry to come in. There are plans of offering around 1 billion in cash to any company who sets up chip manufacturing in India. But as you realize, the chip manufacturing is a very, the entire cycle is pretty complicated. Well, just an incentive help companies to come and invest in a country, that's difficult because people do design chips in India, but they do not manufacture. So it would be interesting to see because everyone wants to jump into the bandwagon at this point of time.
Thank you, Amrita, and I'm sure that we'll hear more from you on this in the following months. We now move to Latin America, where we have Ana Maria Correa. Ana, over to you.
Hello, everyone. The main policy development in May from the Latin American Caribbean region concerns the Internet of Things. The Brazilian Development Bank and the private investment corporation Qualcomm have created together a 45 million venture capital fund to encourage investments in IoT business in Brazil. The fund is going to support up to 30 startups in the next 10 years, and it's expected to close 7 deals in 2021. The fund for this specific purpose is one of the first in the region and will play a leadership role in Latin America by placing Brazil on the global Internet of Things map. Internet of Things related business is expected to bring up to $200 million to the Brazilian economy by 2025. This is all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna, for that short but substantive update. We now go to the Middle East and North Africa, where we have Hanan Boujemi, and Hanan will tell us more about Facebook and Instagram being under fire for alleged bias in removing Palestinian content. Over to Hanan.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Hanan Boujemi, and I'm bringing to you Geneva Internet Platform briefing from the Middle East and North Africa for the month of May 2021. At the heart of the news this month is the controversy around Facebook and Instagram with regards to their content policy as clashes erupt between Palestinians and Israelis in a specific neighborhood. Just triggered a lot of violence and also meant that Facebook is caught in the middle of it because people are trying to report the incidents, but some of it is being taken down. Palestinian activists have indicated that there is a number of ways in which content posted by Palestinians' counterparts have been taken down. It's either through a number of reports from the Israelis or through artificial intelligence, which deemed to be used largely in order to detect content which is classified as terrorizing by either the company or according to US guidelines. A digital rights based organization called Hamla is leading several campaigns in order to tame Facebook's attempt to take down this content, and also advocating for respect of human rights, mainly freedom of expression in this context. On the other side, Facebook is engaging with both the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government in order to discuss the spread of hate speech and incitement to violence on the platforms that they are supporting due to the escalation of the conflicts in the region. This obviously puts at the heart the community guidelines and content regulation as a hot topic in the context of digital policy and the Middle East. So we are yet to see what are the repercussions of such decisions on a cause and on human rights in this digital age. That's all from me this month, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanan. And our last stop for today, last but not least, sorry, would be Africa, where we have Grace with updates that concern access and infrastructure, telecommunications in general, from Nigeria and Ethiopia. Grace, over to you.
Welcome to Updates from Africa, May 2021, a really exciting month for those who have been following the story of Ethiopia's late liberalization of its telecom market. This month, the Ethiopian Communications Authority issued the first ever license to a private operator. The license was issued to a consortium led by Kenya's Safaricom. Other partners in the consortium include Vodafone, as well as a Japanese company, Sumitomo. This deal is being termed as Ethiopia's largest foreign direct investment because they paid about $850 million for their license. And Ethiopia is in the process of privatizing and issuing licenses. It is expected that by next year, they'll even open for mobile money operating licenses. And still on issues, telecoms, Nigeria's Communications Commission this month also signed a memorandum of understanding with a local satellite company, and this will see the deployment of 5G in the country. Now, once deployed, Nigeria will become the third country in Africa to deploy 5G after South Africa and Kenya. There has been a lot of debate in Nigeria about 5G, with some members of the public raising concern about 5G and health, and existing licensees of Nigeria Communications Commission raising concern about the competitiveness of their licenses, which they had acquired at very high license fees. But all these issues were considered by a committee of Nigeria's Senate, and the committee approved the rollout of 5G, and so Nigeria is expected to deploy that technology in the coming months.
Thank you, Grace, for those updates. And that would end our regional perspective segment and, in a way, the briefing as well.
Thank you, Andrea, for driving us around the world again. And thank you all for joining us today. It has been a longer briefing, but I hope you enjoyed at least as much as we have. A kind reminder, the newsletter of the month is coming soon, so stay tuned. There'll be weekly newsletters as well for all what you might have missed or you want to learn in details. Just visit the Digital Watch Observatory, dig.watch. And if not earlier, then see you at the end of June for the next briefing. I think that's 28th or 29th of June, last Tuesday of the month, as always, same time, same place. Till then, stay safe and bye-bye. Thank you.